Hey everyone, quick thing before we dive in. I was looking at my analytics and it turns out most of the people watching aren't actually subscribed. See this? Way more views than subscribers. If you're enjoying the videos and want to see more, hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow and you'll never miss new uploads. Alright, let's get into it.
The cold hit me like a wall when I descended into sub-level 3. My breath came out in thick clouds, fogging the faceplate of my hazmat helmet. The thermometer on my wrist display read -18 degrees Celsius, cold enough to keep the blight dormant, or so the briefing documents claimed. Kennedy to dispatch. I'm at the storage vault. Beginning vial retrieval. Static crackled in my earpiece. The signal was weak this far underground, buried beneath what used to be Mercy Hills, a Raccoon City suburb that officially didn't exist anymore. 6 weeks ago, Umbrella had been conducting humanitarian blood drives here. 6 weeks ago, 214 people lived in the cookie-cutter houses above my head. Now, the entire grid square was condemned, waiting for the military's fire teams to reduce it to ash and vapor. My mission was simple: locate and destroy the experimental blood cache before the sterilization. The vials contained concentrated samples of something called the Blight. Not the T virus, not the G virus, but something newer. Something that scared the containment specialists enough that they'd sent me in alone, rather than risk a full team. The vault door stood open, frost crystallizing along its massive hinges. Emergency lighting painted everything in shades of blue and white. My boots crunched on ice as I stepped inside, and I saw them immediately. Row upon row of refrigerated cabinets, each one filled with glass vials no bigger than my thumb. The liquid inside was wrong, not red like blood should be, but a deep amber color with dark threads suspended in it, like hair floating in water. I pulled the first cabinet open, 20 vials, each one labeled with a residence name and collection date: Sarah Chen, Marcus Reeves, little Amy Whitmore, age 7. My stomach turned. I'd read the reports. I knew what the Blight did. The incendiary charges in my pack would reduce all of this to slag, but protocol demanded I verify the count first. I started pulling cabinets open one by one, checking inventory numbers against my manifest. 40 vials, 60, 90. That's when I heard it. A hiss, low and steady, like air escaping from a punctured tire. I froze, scanning the vault. The sound was coming from the far wall, where the main refrigeration unit sat. A massive apparatus of pipes and coolant tanks that kept this entire level at preservation temperature. Frost was forming on one of the pipes, spreading fast, and the temperature display on the unit was climbing. -18, -17, -15. Dispatch, I have a problem. The cooling system is failing. More static, then nothing. I moved toward the unit, already knowing it was useless. The pipes were corroded, eaten through by something that left organic-looking pitting in the metal. This wasn't mechanical failure. Something had been growing in the system itself, slowly compromising it over weeks or months. The blight wasn't just in the vials. -12 degrees. I had to work fast. Forget the count. I needed to set the charges and get out before the temperature rose high enough to activate whatever was in those vials. I turned back toward the cabinets, pulling the incendiary packs from my bag. That's when Cabinet 7 exploded. I didn't see it happen. I heard the glass shatter and felt the spray hit my left side like someone had thrown a bucket of ice water at me. The force knocked me sideways into Cabinet 9, which toppled, sending another cascade of vials smashing onto the concrete floor. I scrambled backward, but my boots skidded in the spreading liquid. The amber fluid was everywhere, pooling on the ground, splattered across my hazmat suit, dripping from the cabinets. And those dark threads in the liquid were moving now, writhing like they were alive. My hands shook as I checked the suit's integrity monitor. Green lights across the board. The suit was intact. The helmet was intact. I was sealed in, protected. But then I looked at my left glove. There was a tear in the material, just below the wrist seal, a small puncture, probably from when I'd hit the cabinet. And through that tear, I could see skin, my skin. And on that skin, there was amber liquid. The blight. I'd been exposed. For 5 seconds, I couldn't move, couldn't think. Training took over on second 6. I lurched to the decontamination station mounted by the door, slamming my gloved hand under the chemical shower. Caustic disinfectant sprayed over the tear, burning even through the protective material. And I counted to 30, watching the amber liquid wash away in streams of pink-tinged foam. When I pulled my hand out, the skin was red and raw, but clean. Had to be clean. I stood there, breathing hard, staring at the ruined glove. The temperature display read -8 degrees now. The vials still intact in the cabinets were beginning to sweat condensation as the frost melted. I had to finish the job. Moving mechanically, I placed the incendiary charges around the vault, one by each bank of cabinets, one on the refrigeration unit itself. My hands were steady, professional. I was fine. The decontamination had worked. I'd been exposed for maybe 3 seconds, and I'd washed it off immediately. I armed the charges with a 30-minute delay, then headed for the exit. The stairwell up to sub-level 2 was narrow and dark, but I took the steps 2 at a time, eager to put distance between myself and the vault. My hand throbbed where the chemical burn had eaten through skin, but that was normal, expected. I was halfway up to sub-level 1 when the first cramp hit. It started in my forearm, a sudden violent contraction that locked the muscles solid. My hand clenched into a claw, and I gasped, grabbing the railing with my right hand to keep from falling. The cramp lasted maybe 10 seconds, then released, leaving my arm weak and trembling. I stared at the torn glove. The skin underneath wasn't red anymore. It was gray. -5 degrees, the temperature display had read when I left. Warm enough for activation. I pulled the glove off completely, and my breath caught in my throat. The gray discoloration spread in a rough circle about 2 inches across, centered on the puncture site. The skin there looked dry, almost chalky, with tiny fissures spreading through it like cracked earth. And underneath, I could see something dark moving. Not blood, something else. I touched it with my right hand, and the gray skin felt hard, cold, like touching stone. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." But I knew the reports. I'd read every page of the blight documentation. Stage 1, dermal calcification. The pathogen attacks the soft tissue first, hardening it, preparing the host for the next phase. I had hours, maybe less. I started running. The laboratory level was 3 floors up, past the residential blocks where the test subjects had lived before the outbreak. My footsteps echoed through empty corridors as I ran, and with each step, my left arm felt heavier. The gray patch was spreading. I could feel it creeping up my forearm, millimeter by millimeter, the skin tightening and hardening. Stage 2 would be worse, the spore sacs. I burst through the laboratory doors and headed straight for the medical bay, my good hand already pulling up files on the wrist computer. There had been research, experimental treatments, something about a chemical burn technique that could cauterize the infection if applied early enough. The medical bay was a disaster. Cabinets overturned, equipment smashed, blood dried black on the walls. Whatever had happened here 6 weeks ago, it had been violent. But I didn't care about the mess. I needed the supply manifest. I found a working terminal and pulled up the inventory system. My left arm was cramping again, longer this time. And when I looked down, I saw the gray had reached my elbow. The skin there was beginning to crack, revealing darker tissue underneath. Not muscle, something fibrous and dense. The manifest loaded. Chemical storage, subsection D. Hydrochloric acid, sulfuric compounds, experimental enzyme solutions. And there, buried in a list of oxidizing agents, something called compound AX7. The notes were brief: extreme caustic properties, cellular necrosis on contact, proposed use, emergency infection excision via controlled burn. That was it. That was what I needed. I stood, and my vision swam. The room tilted, and I grabbed the desk to steady myself. My left arm hung at my side now, too stiff to bend properly. The gray had spread past my elbow, creeping toward my shoulder, and I could feel pressure building under the skin. Not pain exactly. Pressure. Like something was growing in there, pushing outward. Chemical storage was 2 corridors away. I could make it. I had to make it. Because the alternative was turning into one of those things the reports described. The images I'd seen in the briefing files. Bodies transformed into gardens of fungal growth. chest cavities split open to reveal massive bloom structures, faces distorted by bulging sacs of spores. The blight didn't make zombies, it made incubators, and I had maybe 3 hours before it finished with me. The corridor to chemical storage stretched ahead of me like a tunnel, 40 meters, maybe 50. I'd walked farther distances 1,000 times without thinking. Now, each step felt like dragging myself through concrete. My left arm was completely gray now, from fingertips to shoulder, the skin hard and cracked like dried mud. I couldn't feel it anymore. Not temperature, not touch, nothing. Just that constant pressure building underneath, like a balloon being slowly inflated inside my bicep. I stopped at the corridor intersection, bracing myself against the wall, and made the mistake of looking at my reflection in a shattered window. The gray had reached my neck. A patch the size of my palm spread from my collarbone up toward my jaw. The skin there pulled tight and textured wrong. And beneath it, I could see something moving. A slow, rhythmic pulsing that made the calcified skin bulge outward with each beat. Stage 2. The spore sacs were forming. I tore my gaze away and kept moving. The wrist computer showed my heart rate at 140, blood pressure spiking. My body knew something was catastrophically wrong, even if it couldn't fight what was happening. The blight didn't trigger an immune response. That's what made it so efficient. By the time the host realized they were infected, the pathogen had already hijacked the cellular structure. Chemical storage was through the next door, marked with faded hazard symbols and a keycard lock that hadn't worked in weeks. I shouldered through, my right shoulder, because my left side was too stiff to move properly now, and stumbled into the storage room. Shelves lined every wall, packed with bottles and containers in various states of organization. Some sections looked untouched. Others had been ransacked, broken glass crunching under my boots. Emergency lighting flickered overhead, casting everything into unreliable shadows. I pulled up the manifest on my wrist display with a shaking right hand. Compound AX7. Storage designation, Cabinet 7. D, Section 3. Section 3 was at the back of the room. I started walking, scanning cabinet labels as I went. 1A, 2C, 4B. The numbering system made no sense. Drawers and cabinets mixed together with no apparent pattern. My vision was starting to blur at the edges, and sweat ran down my face despite the cold. The infection was affecting my whole system now, not just the local tissue. Fever, accelerated metabolism, my body burning through resources to fuel whatever was growing inside it. 5D6A. The pressure in my neck intensified suddenly, and I gasped, grabbing a shelf for support. My left side felt enormously heavy now, like someone had strapped weights to my arm and shoulder. I forced myself to look. The gray patch on my neck had swollen into a distinct bulge, roughly the size of a golf ball, pressing outward against the calcified skin. I could see the individual cracks in the surface spreading wider to accommodate the growth underneath, and the color was changing, the gray taking on a yellowish tint around the bulge, like old bruising. Not a bruise, a spore sac, filling with millions of microscopic fungal particles, ready to burst and spread contamination across everything in a 20-foot radius. I had 2 of them now, one on my neck, one in my shoulder. The report said the final stage produced dozens, clustered across the chest and face, before the primary bloom erupted from the sternum. 7D, finally. I yanked the cabinet open with my good hand. Inside were rows of glass bottles, each one labeled with chemical formulas I barely understood. I scanned desperately, looking for AX7, my vision swimming. There. 3rd shelf, pushed to the back, behind larger containers. A bottle no bigger than a water flask, filled with liquid so dark it looked black. The label read, Compound AX7, Extreme Hazard, Caustic Agent, Authorized Use Only. I grabbed it, and another cramp seized my chest. This one was different, deeper. It felt like someone had reached into my ribcage and squeezed, and when it released, I could feel something had changed inside me, something fundamental. I pressed my right hand to my sternum, and through the hazmat suit, I could feel a new hardness there, a patch of gray skin forming over my heart, the primary bloom site. No, I said aloud, my voice cracking. Not yet. Not fucking yet. I needed the other components. The AX7 was the catalyst, but the procedure required a delivery method, something to inject the compound directly into the infection sites. And I needed a sedative, because the reports had been very clear about one thing. The cauterization process would be agonizing. Medical supplies, the bay where I'd found the manifest. I turned to leave and my legs buckled. I went down hard on one knee, barely catching myself with my right hand. The left arm dangled uselessly, and when I tried to move it, nothing happened. The gray had spread across my chest now, a creeping tide of calcification that was locking up my torso muscle by muscle. Get up. You have to get up. I forced myself to stand, using the shelves for support. The bottle of AX7 felt impossibly heavy in my grip. My breathing was labored, each inhale shallow because my chest couldn't expand properly anymore. The gray skin didn't flex like normal tissue. It held rigid, like a carapace forming over my ribs. The walk back to the medical bay took forever. I couldn't run anymore, could barely walk. My left leg was starting to stiffen too, the gray creeping down from my hip, and I had to drag it with each step. The sound echoed through the empty corridor, one normal footfall, then a scraping drag, over and over. The spore sac on my neck pulsed with each heartbeat now, visibly swelling and contracting. I could feel the skin stretching, ready to split. How long did I have? An hour? Minutes? The medical bay doors were still open. I stumbled through them and went straight for the pharmaceutical cabinet, yanking drawers open with increasingly frantic movements. Bandages, antiseptics. Useless. I needed injection equipment, needed sedatives. There, a locked drawer marked controlled substances. I smashed it open with the AX7 bottle, not caring if the glass broke. It didn't. The drawer popped open, revealing neat rows of ampules and pre-filled syringes. Morphine, midazolam, enough to knock out someone twice my size. And in the surgical supply section, I found what I really needed. A set of large-bore needles designed for draining fluid from infected tissue, perfect for injecting the AX7 directly into the spore sacs. I laid everything out on the medical table, hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the items. The compound, the needles, the sedatives, everything I needed to attempt the procedure that had a documented survival rate of 12%, better than the 0% chance I had without it. The gray had reached my right hip now, and I could feel new pressure building in my chest, a second bulge forming just below the first, pressing outward against my sternum. I touched it through the hazmat suit and felt the characteristic swell of another spore sac, bigger than the ones on my neck and shoulder. This was the primary bloom, the one that would eventually split my chest open like overripe fruit. I had to start, now. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I pulled up the camera on my wrist computer and positioned it to capture my reflection in a wall-mounted mirror. What I saw made my stomach drop. The left side of my body was barely recognizable as human anymore. The gray calcification covered everything from my fingertips to my face, my chest, down to my knee. But it was the bulges that made it monstrous. I counted 6 distinct swellings now, 2 on my neck, 1 on my shoulder, 3 clustered around my chest. Each one pulsed with that slow, steady rhythm. The yellowish skin stretched thin over whatever was growing inside. And my face. God, my face. The gray had crept up my jaw and was spreading across my left cheek. The skin there was cracking badly, deep fissures that showed dark tissue underneath. My left eye was starting to swell, the eyelid hardening and pulling back, giving me a permanent wide-eyed stare. I looked like something caught mid-transformation, half human and half something else. I saved the image. If I didn't make it, at least there would be documentation, evidence of what the blight actually did. Then I picked up the first syringe of morphine and jabbed it into my right thigh, pushing the plunger down. The drug hit my system in seconds, a wave of artificial calm that did nothing to stop my hands from shaking, but made the fear retreat to a manageable distance. Time to begin. I filled the first needle with compound AX7, the dark liquid looking like ink inside the clear plastic chamber. The needle was designed for fluid drainage, which meant it was large, thick enough to inject deep into tissue. The compound would spread through the infection, causing rapid cellular necrosis, controlled death, burning out the blight before it could complete its work. Theoretically, the first target was the spore sac on my neck. I angled my head to expose it fully, watching in the mirror as I brought the needle close. The bulge was the size of a hen's egg now, the skin so thin I could see dark shapes moving inside it. Spores, millions of them, waiting to be released. I pressed the needle against the calcified skin. It didn't penetrate. I pushed harder, and the needle tip skidded across the gray surface like I was trying to inject stone. The calcification was too thick, too hard. The needle couldn't pierce it. "No," I breathed. "No, come on." I tried again, pressing with all my strength, and this time the needle tip found a crack in the gray skin, one of the fissures spreading across the surface. It slipped inside, and I immediately pushed the plunger. The effect was instantaneous. The AX7 hit the infected tissue, and my entire left side exploded into agony. It felt like I had been doused in acid from the inside out. The morphine meant nothing against this. It was beyond pain, beyond anything I'd experienced. I heard myself screaming, a raw animal sound, and my vision went white at the edges. But I kept the needle in place, kept pushing, had to empty the entire dose into the sack. In the mirror, I watched the bulge on my neck start to collapse. The yellowish skin darkened to black, the swelling deflating as the compound destroyed the tissue inside. Smoke rose from the injection site, actual smoke, wisps of it curling up as the AX7 burned through the fungal matter. The needle was empty. I pulled it out, gasping, and staggered back against the wall. 1 down, 5 to go. And I'd already used up a third of the compound. The blackened tissue on my neck was spreading now, the chemical burn eating through the calcified skin in a widening circle. It was working. The blight was dying in that spot, the gray reverting to normal flesh as the infection was cauterized. But the process was destroying healthy tissue too, leaving behind dead necrotic skin that would probably never heal properly. I didn't care. Dead tissue was better than fungal growth. I refilled the needle with AX7, my hands barely able to grip it now. The pain from the first injection hadn't faded. It had settled into a constant burning that made every breath difficult, but I couldn't stop. The other sacs were still growing, still preparing to burst. The second target was my shoulder, larger than the first one had been, the bulge straining against the gray skin. I found another fissure, drove the needle in, and pushed. The scream that came out of me didn't sound human. My legs gave out. I collapsed to the floor, convulsing, the needle still stuck in my shoulder. The AX7 was doing its work, burning through the infection, and I could smell it now. A chemical stench mixed with something organic and rotten, like burning meat. Through the haze of pain, I watched the shoulder sac deflate and blacken, the tissue dying in real time. 2 down. I tried to stand and couldn't. My left side was a dead weight now, completely unresponsive. The gray skin had cracked away in patches where the compound had worked, revealing raw flesh underneath. But the calcification was still spreading on my right side, creeping across my chest toward my heart. The primary bloom was growing faster. I could feel it. I had 3 more injections to do, 3 more sacs to burn out before they matured, and I was running out of time, running out of compound, running out of strength. I pulled myself up using the medical table, leaving bloody handprints on the metal surface. My reflection in the mirror showed something barely recognizable, half my face blackened and dead, the other half going gray, my chest a patchwork of calcified skin and burned tissue. But I was still conscious, still moving, still fighting. I filled the needle again. The third injection site was on my upper chest, just below my collarbone. The spore sac there had grown to the size of my fist, a massive bulge that strained against the gray skin with each labored breath I took. I could see it throbbing in the mirror, the internal pressure so great that the calcified surface had started to split in places, showing glimpses of the yellow-brown mass inside. If it burst before I could inject it, the spores would fill the room, fill my lungs. I'd be breathing in my own infection, accelerating the process tenfold. I positioned the needle over the largest crack in the gray skin and drove it in deep. This time, I didn't scream. I couldn't. The pain locked my throat completely, my jaw clenching so hard I felt teeth crack. My vision tunneled to a pinpoint, then expanded in bursts of white light. The needle fell from my hand, bouncing off the table, and I realized I'd only pushed half the dose. Not enough. It had to be the full dose. I grabbed the needle from the floor with my right hand, my only functioning hand now, and jammed it back into the crack. My fingers found the plunger and kept pushing, until the chamber was empty and the AX7 was flooding the infected tissue. The sac didn't just deflate this time, it ruptured. The calcified skin split open with a wet tearing sound, and thick yellowish fluid gushed out, running down my chest in streams. But it wasn't spores. The compound had killed them before they could mature, turning the contents of the sac into dead, liquefied tissue. The chemical reaction continued inside the wound, burning deeper, and I could hear a sizzling sound as the AX7 ate through the fungal matter. Smoke poured from the rupture, acrid and choking. I bent over the table, retching, my body trying to expel something that was coming from inside me. Nothing came up but bile. The pain was transcendent now, beyond anything the morphine could touch. Every nerve ending in my chest was firing at once, screaming danger, and my heart hammered against my ribs in an irregular, panicked rhythm. But the sac was dead. I could see it in the mirror, the bulge collapsing inward, the tissue turning black and necrotic as the infection was burned away. 3 down, 3 to go. I checked the AX7 bottle, maybe a third left, enough for 2 more injections if I was careful. But I had 3 sacs remaining, 2 smaller ones on my abdomen, and the primary bloom over my sternum. I'd have to choose. My legs were barely holding me upright now. The gray calcification had spread down my right side, hardening the muscles of my thigh and calf. I could still move the leg, but it felt distant, disconnected, like operating a puppet on strings that were starting to fray. And the pressure in my chest was building. The primary bloom was accelerating, feeding on the resources my body was pumping into it. I could feel it growing with each heartbeat, pushing outward against my sternum, preparing for the final stage. The reports called it catastrophic structural breach, clinical language for what actually happened. The bloom would force its way through the chest wall, cracking ribs, tearing through muscle and skin, emerging like some obscene flower from the wreckage of the host body. The victim usually died from the trauma alone, before the spores even had a chance to spread. I had maybe 30 minutes before it reached that point. Decision time. The 2 smaller sacs on my abdomen were growing, but slowly. They were stage 2 formations, not immediately lethal. The primary bloom was stage 3, the end game. If I didn't stop it, nothing else mattered. I had to use the remaining compound on the primary bloom and hope it was enough. I refilled the needle, watching the dark liquid climb the chamber. My hands were shaking so badly, it took 3 tries to get the needle seated properly. The bottle was almost empty now, maybe 1 more dose left after this. The primary bloom sat directly over my sternum, a massive swelling that had transformed the center of my chest into something alien. The gray skin there had taken on a purple tint, stretched so thin I could see the structure underneath. Not just a single sac, but a cluster of them, interwoven like grapes, all pulsing in synchronization. This wasn't just fungal growth. This was architecture. The blight was building something inside me. I pressed the needle against the surface. The skin resisted at first, then gave way with a pop as the needle punched through. I felt it penetrate deep, past the calcified outer layer, through the sac walls, into the core of the infection. And then I pushed the plunger. The world went white. I don't remember falling, but I must have, because suddenly I was on the floor, my back against the table leg, my entire body convulsing. The pain was beyond description. It wasn't just in my chest anymore. It was everywhere, radiating out through every blood vessel, every nerve. The AX7 had hit the primary bloom and triggered a cascade reaction, burning through the interconnected sac structures. I could feel them dying inside me, could feel the tissue collapsing, liquefying, the chemical fire spreading through my chest cavity. My vision strove between darkness and blinding light, and somewhere far away, I could hear alarms, my own body's panic response, heart rate spiking above 200, blood pressure crashing. Through the haze, I looked down at my chest. The primary bloom was deflating, but not smoothly. It was rupturing in sections, the gray skin splitting in star-shaped tears, and with each rupture, more of that yellow-brown fluid poured out. But this time, there was something else in the liquid, solid masses, the size of walnuts, tumbling out with the fluid. The immature bloom structures, the things that would have burst from my chest if they'd had another hour to develop. They looked like tumors, dark and fibrous, covered in small nodules that might have become spore sacs themselves. The AX7 was killing them before they could finish forming, reducing them to dead tissue. But the damage was done. My chest was a crater now, a massive wound where the calcified skin had torn away completely, exposing raw flesh and the white gleam of bone underneath. I was looking at my own sternum. The morphine must have worn off because the pain was crystal clear now, sharp and immediate. Every breath felt like inhaling broken glass. But I was breathing. My heart was beating. The primary bloom was dead. I'd survived stage 3, but the 2 smaller sacs on my abdomen were still there, still growing, and I had maybe 1 dose of AX7 left. I tried to stand and couldn't. My right leg had stopped responding completely, the gray calcification locking the joint solid. My left leg was dead weight, had been for the past 20 minutes. I was paralyzed from the waist down. I dragged myself across the floor using my right arm, pulling my body toward the medical table where the AX7 bottle sat. It seemed impossibly far away, though it couldn't have been more than 6 feet. My chest left a smear of blood and yellowish fluid across the tiles. When I reached the table, I used it to pull myself into a sitting position, my back against the cabinet. From this angle, I could see both abdominal sacs clearly. They'd grown larger since I'd last checked, each one now the size of a tennis ball, bulging outward from my lower abdomen like some grotesque pregnancy. If they matured and burst, the spores would enter my abdominal cavity. The infection would spread to my organs, liver, intestines, kidneys. Even if I survived that, even if I managed to burn them out after the fact, the damage would be catastrophic. I had to deal with them now. I reached up to the table, fingers scrabbling for the AX7 bottle, and knocked it over. It rolled off the edge, and I caught it with a desperate grab, nearly dropping it. The liquid inside sloshed, barely an inch left in the bottom, enough for 1 injection, maybe 2 sacs, 1 dose. I could try to split it between them, half a dose each. But the reports had been clear about partial treatments. They didn't work. The compound needed to reach a critical concentration to trigger the cascade necrosis. Anything less, and the infection would just adapt, become resistant. I had to choose which sac to save myself from and which one to let mature. My hands were shaking as I filled the needle, drawing every last drop from the bottle. The chamber filled to about 75%. Definitely not enough for 2 full injections, barely enough for 1. The sacs pulsed, both of them, in perfect synchronization with my heartbeat. I could feel the pressure building in both, the skin stretching. They'd burst soon, within the hour, maybe sooner. Think. There had to be a way to do this. The left sac was positioned over my intestines. If it burst there, the spores would infiltrate my digestive tract, and the resulting infection would cause massive internal bleeding, probably fatal within hours. The right sac was over my liver. A burst there would be slower. The liver could tolerate more damage, had better blood supply to potentially flush some of the spores. Still catastrophic, but maybe survivable. Left sac first. Kill the immediate threat, then deal with the consequences of the right one as they came. I positioned the needle over the left sac, finding a crack in the gray skin. My vision was doubling now, my body going into shock from blood loss and trauma. I had to do this quickly before I lost consciousness. The needle went in, I pushed the plunger, and this time, when the pain hit, I welcomed it. Because pain meant the compound was working. Pain meant the infection was dying. The left sac collapsed, the tissue blackening and liquefying. Smoke rose from the injection site. I watched it all happen in a detached haze, my consciousness starting to flicker. But I'd done it. 4 sacs eliminated, the primary bloom destroyed. The right sac remained, still growing, but slower now. Without the primary bloom to drive the infection's progression, the remaining growth had lost its accelerant. It would still mature, would still burst. But I had time now. Hours, maybe. Enough to get out of this facility and find help. If I could move. I looked down at my body and took inventory. Left side, completely calcified and dead. A mix of gray stone-like tissue and blackened chemical burns. Right side, partially calcified, with 1 remaining spore sac. Chest, a gaping wound where the primary bloom had been. Legs, both non-functional, paralyzed by the spreading calcification. I couldn't walk, could barely sit upright. and the facility was deep underground, with multiple levels between me and the surface. But I wasn't dead yet, and that meant I could still move forward. I spotted a medical stretcher folded against the wall, one of those wheeled beds used for patient transport. If I could get onto it, I could use my one working arm to pull myself through the corridors, wheel by wheel, until I reached the stairwell. The stairs would be a problem, but that was a future problem. I began dragging myself toward the stretcher, leaving a trail across the floor. Each movement sent fresh waves of agony through my chest, but I kept going. The alternative was staying here, letting that last sack mature, dying alone in this contaminated tomb. I reached the stretcher and managed to unfold it, the wheels scraping against the tile. Getting onto it was harder. I had to use the cabinet as leverage, pulling myself up inch by inch until I could roll sideways onto the padded surface. The world tilted dangerously, and for a moment I thought I'd pass out. But I held on, breathing through the pain, waiting for my vision to clear. When it did, I grabbed the wheel rim with my right hand and pulled. The stretcher moved. Not far, just a few inches, but it moved. I pulled again, another few inches. This was going to take forever, but I had forever. As long as my heart kept beating, as long as that last sack stayed intact, I had time. I pulled myself out of the medical bay and into the corridor, one agonizing rotation at a time. The facility stretched ahead of me, dimly lit and silent. 3 floors up to ground level, maybe a quarter-mile of corridor. An impossible distance in my condition. But I'd already done the impossible today. I'd burned a fungal infection out of my own body with acid. What was a little crawling compared to that? I kept pulling, kept moving forward, and tried not to think about the remaining sack on my abdomen, still growing, still ticking like a biological time bomb. One problem at a time. First, get to the stairs, then figure out how to climb them with no working legs, then get to the surface, then find help, then, maybe, survive this. The stretcher wheels squeaked as I pulled myself forward into the darkness, leaving a trail of blood and chemical smoke in my wake. Behind me, deep in the facility's sublevels, the incendiary charges I'd planted were still counting down. 23 minutes until detonation. I had to move faster. The first stairwell appeared after what felt like hours, but was probably 10 minutes. I'd pulled myself 300 feet through corridors lined with observation windows that showed empty residential cells. The rooms where Umbrella had kept the test subjects before everything went wrong. Ahead, the emergency exit sign glowed red above a door marked "Stairs to Surface." 20 minutes until detonation. I grabbed the stretcher wheel and pulled myself to the door. It was slightly ajar, probably left open during the evacuation. Through the gap, I could see concrete stairs climbing upward into darkness. 3 flights to the next level, then 2 more after that to reach ground level. No way I could wheel the stretcher upstairs. I'd have to climb. I rolled off the stretcher and hit the floor hard, my dead legs useless beneath me. The impact jarred my chest wound, and I felt something tear inside, fresh blood welling up from the exposed tissue. The pain was constant now, a baseline roar that spiked with every movement, but pain meant I was still alive, still feeling, still had tissue that could register damage. I grabbed the doorframe and pulled myself through into the stairwell. The steps stretched upward, each one a separate obstacle. 45 steps to the next landing, I counted. Then another 45. Then a final 30 to the surface. 120 steps total. I looked at my right arm, the only limb I had left that worked. The muscles were shaking from exhaustion, the skin slick with sweat and blood. But the gray calcification hadn't reached it yet. My right arm was still mine. It would have to be enough. I grabbed the first step and pulled. My body scraped up 6 inches of concrete, dead weight dragging. The wound on my chest left a smear of red. I grabbed the second step, pulled again. Another 6 inches. This was going to take forever, and I didn't have forever. 18 minutes. I established a rhythm. Grab, pull, breathe, grab, pull, breathe. Each movement was agony, but I stopped thinking about the pain and just focused on the next step, then the next, then the next. My right arm felt like it was on fire by the time I reached the first landing. The muscles were cramping, threatening to lock up completely. I couldn't let that happen. If I'd lost the use of my right arm, I was finished. I gave myself 10 seconds to rest, counting them down in my head. Then I started on the next flight. Somewhere around step 60, I felt the remaining spore sac pulse. It wasn't the steady rhythm I'd become accustomed to. This was different, a sudden, violent contraction that made my entire abdomen spasm. I looked down and saw the sac had swollen noticeably larger. The gray skin stretched so thin, it was nearly translucent. Inside, I could see dark shapes moving with increasing agitation. The spores were maturing. Without the primary bloom to regulate the process, the remaining sac was becoming unstable. It had been growing slowly for the past hour, but now it was accelerating, feeding on the stress hormones flooding my system. My body's fight or flight response was inadvertently providing exactly what the blight needed to reach final maturity. I had to stay calm, had to slow my heart rate, reduce the hormone output. Impossible while climbing stairs with one arm and dragging a half-calcified body. The sac pulsed again, harder this time, and I felt something shift inside it. A tearing sensation, like tissue separating. The skin over the sac darkened from gray to a mottled purple-black, the color of burst blood vessels. It was going to rupture soon. Very soon. I climbed faster. 15 minutes. My right arm was screaming at me now, the muscles pushed beyond their limits. I could feel them starting to tear, microscopic damage accumulating with each pull. But I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The next landing was visible above me, just 20 more steps. 19, 18, 17. The spore sac convulsed, and this time I heard it. A wet, organic sound like tearing meat. A crack appeared in the gray skin, a thin split that wept yellowish fluid. Not bursting yet, but close. So close. 16, 15, 14. My vision was tunneling, the edges going dark. Blood loss and exhaustion were catching up with me. I could feel my body starting to shut down non-essential functions, conserving energy for the critical systems, heart, lungs, brain. Everything else was negotiable. 13, 12, 11. The crack in the sac widened, more fluid leaked out, running down my side in warm streams. But no spores yet. The internal structures hadn't fully matured, just a little longer, just hold together a little longer. 10, 9, 8. I reached the second landing and immediately started on the final flight. 30 steps to the surface, to open air, to potential rescue. The sac pulsed 3 times in rapid succession, and I felt the skin split further. The opening was maybe an inch long now, a gaping wound in my abdomen that showed the yellow-brown mass inside. I could see individual nodules in the mass, hundreds of them, each one a packet of spores waiting to be released. Any moment now. 12 minutes. I climbed faster, ignoring the pain, ignoring the exhaustion, ignoring the tearing sensation in my right shoulder as the muscles gave out. My arm was barely responding now, the movements more like convulsions than controlled pulls. But I was still moving forward, still ascending. 20 steps left. The sac convulsed again, and this time the split became a tear. A flap of gray skin peeled back, and the yellow-brown mass bulged outward, pressing against the opening. I could see it trying to emerge, the pressure inside forcing it out. Number? Not yet. Not here. 15 steps. The mass pushed further through the tear. It was happening. The rupture was happening, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. 10 steps. I grabbed the railing and pulled with everything I had left, my body scraping up the concrete in jerking motions. The gray calcification had spread to my right hip now, starting to lock up my torso. Soon I wouldn't be able to bend at all. 5 steps. The mass tore free with a wet sound, tumbling out of the sac and landing on the stairs below me. It sat there, quivering, a fist-sized lump of infected tissue covered in those nodular packets. And as I watched, the packets began to swell. They were going to burst, going to fill the stairwell with spores. I lunged for the top of the stairs, my right arm finding the final step, and pulled myself through the door at the top. It was labeled ground level, surface access. I slammed it shut behind me with my last bit of strength and collapsed. Through the door, I heard the packets burst with a series of soft pops, like bubble wrap being crushed. Then silence. The spores were loose in the stairwell, billions of them, floating in the air, settling on every surface. But I was on the other side of the door, safe, for now. 10 minutes. I was in a loading bay, the kind used for equipment deliveries. One wall was entirely taken up by a massive rolling door, currently closed. But there had to be a control panel, a way to open it. I looked around and spotted it, a simple button marked "Door Open" in faded yellow paint, mounted on the wall 10 feet away. 10 feet might as well have been 10 miles. But I'd come this far. I dragged myself across the concrete floor, leaving a trail of blood and chemical residue. My right arm was barely functional now, the muscles torn and failing. Each pull was smaller than the last, each movement more of a spasm than controlled motion. 8 feet, 6 feet, 4 feet. The wound on my abdomen where the sack had been was hemorrhaging steadily now, blood pooling beneath me. I'd lost too much. My vision was going gray at the edges, consciousness flickering like a dying light bulb. 2 feet. I reached up, my hand shaking violently, and slapped the button. Nothing happened. I hit it again, harder, and this time I heard a motor engage. The rolling door began to rise with a mechanical whine, cold air rushing in from outside. Sunlight, actual sunlight, poured through the widening gap. I'd made it to the surface, 7 minutes. Through the open door, I could see the outside world. The loading bay opened onto a service road that ran through the contaminated zone, probably leading to the perimeter fence and the military checkpoint beyond. Maybe a half-mile away. Salvation. But I couldn't make it that far. Could barely move at all now. My right arm had finally given out completely, the muscles torn beyond function. I was lying in a spreading pool of my own blood, unable to do anything but breathe and watch the door. The gray calcification had spread across my entire torso now, locking my body into a rigid shell. I could still feel everything, the pain, the cold, the wet heat of blood loss. But I couldn't move. I was done. But I'd completed the mission. The blood vials were destroyed. The facility would detonate in 6 minutes, reducing everything to rubble and fire, sterilizing the contamination. The blight would be contained. I'd succeeded, even if I wouldn't survive to see it. My vision was fading fast now, the sunlight becoming a distant fuzzy glow. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, growing slower, more irregular. My body was shutting down, system by system. And then I heard something else, an engine. The sound of an approaching vehicle growing louder. I tried to move, to signal, but my body wouldn't respond. All I could do was lie there and listen as the engine noise grew closer, then stopped. Footsteps, running footsteps on concrete. Jesus Christ! A man's voice, shocked and horrified. Command, this is Rescue 6. I have a survivor at the loading bay. Single male, critical condition. I need immediate medical evac. I felt hands on me, checking for a pulse. A face appeared above me, swimming in and out of focus. Military uniform, hazmat gear, the rescue team I'd been promised if I didn't make it out on my own. Stay with me, the man said. Medic's on the way. You're gonna be okay. Do you understand? You're gonna be okay. I tried to speak but couldn't. Tried to tell him about the spores in the stairwell, about the remaining contamination in my body, about the timer counting down in the sublevels. But my voice was gone. 4 minutes, more footsteps, more voices. Someone was applying pressure to my wounds. Someone else was setting up an IV line. Professional, efficient movements. They'd done this before. We need to move him now, someone said. The charges are set to blow in less than 5 minutes. He won't survive transport in this condition. He won't survive if we're here when this place goes up. They lifted me onto a stretcher, a real one this time, with proper restraints and medical equipment. The movement sent fresh waves of pain through my body, but I barely felt it. I was too far gone. The world became a blur of motion and sound, the stretcher being loaded into a vehicle, the engine roaring to life, the sensation of acceleration as we sped away from the facility. 2 minutes. Through the vehicle's rear window, I could see the loading bay receding into the distance, the abandoned facility growing smaller. We were maybe a quarter mile away when the timer reached 0. The explosion was silent at first, just a flash of brilliant white light that turned the interior of the vehicle into a camera flash. Then the shockwave hit, rocking us sideways, and the sound followed. A deep, concussive whomp that I felt in my bones. The facility collapsed inward, 3 floors of concrete and steel imploding into the sublevels, then erupting upward in a column of fire and smoke. The incendiary charges had ignited everything, creating a firestorm hot enough to sterilize the entire complex. The blood vials were ash. The spores in the stairwell were ash. The blight was contained. Mission accomplished. I let my eyes close. I woke up drowning. My lungs burned. My chest convulsed. And for a terrifying moment, I couldn't tell which way was up. Then hands grabbed me, strong, steady, and pulled me upward through thick liquid that clung to my skin like oil. I broke the surface gasping, coughing up mouthfuls of warm, gel-like substance that tasted like copper and antiseptic. The hands guided me to the edge of what I realized was a tank, a cylindrical chamber maybe 8 feet across, filled with translucent amber fluid. "Easy, Agent Kennedy." Deep breaths. "You're safe." The voice belonged to a woman in a white lab coat standing beside the tank. She held a towel, which she draped over my shoulders as I sat on the edge, still coughing up the regenerative fluid. "What?" My voice came out as a rasp. I tried again. "What happened?" "You've been in the regeneration tank for 1 week," she said, helping me stand on shaking legs. "We had to work fast. The tissue damage was extensive, and conventional treatment wouldn't have been sufficient. The regenerative process takes time, but it's effective." I looked down at my body. The gray calcification was gone, all of it. Where there had been stone-like skin and cracked, dead tissue, there was now pink, new flesh, tender and sensitive, but whole. I flexed my left hand, the one that had been completely calcified just a week ago. The fingers moved smoothly, every joint responding. "The chest wound," I managed, touching my sternum. The skin there was smooth, unmarked, no gaping crater, no exposed bone. "Fully regenerated," the doctor confirmed. "The treatment we used is based on modified T-virus regenerative properties, medical grade only, completely controlled. It accelerated your natural healing by a factor of 50 and broke down the calcified tissue at the cellular level. Your body essentially rebuilt itself while you were unconscious." She gestured to a full-length mirror mounted on the wall, and I walked toward it on unsteady legs. What I saw made my breath catch. I looked normal, pale, thin from a week of disuse, covered in the slick residue of the regenerative fluid, but whole. The chemical burns were gone. The surgical scars were gone. Even the gray patches I'd expected to remain were completely absent. "There's no permanent damage?" I asked, not quite believing it. "Minimal." She pulled up a tablet, showing me a series of scans. "We found trace amounts of dormant blight tissue in your lungs and liver during the initial examination. The regenerative process broke it down and expelled it. Your latest scans are completely clear. No infection, no calcification, no foreign tissue. You're clean, Agent Kennedy." I stared at the scans, at the images of healthy organs, at the proof that I'd actually survived this intact. "The AX7 cauterization saved your life," the doctor continued. "By destroying the primary bloom and the majority of the spore sacs, you bought yourself enough time for us to get you here. Without that intervention, the regeneration tank wouldn't have worked. The infection would have been too advanced to reverse. You did the right thing, even if it nearly killed you in the process." I touched my chest again, feeling the steady beat of my heart beneath healthy skin. No hard masses, no gray tissue, just muscle and bone and flesh, exactly as it should be. "How long until I'm cleared for duty?" She smiled slightly. "Eager to get back to work? You'll need 2 weeks of physical therapy to rebuild the muscle mass you lost. After that, pending a final medical evaluation, you'll be cleared for active service. Full duty, no restrictions. Full duty, no permanent damage, no pieces of the blight embedded in my body forever." I'd survived, really survived, not just barely clinging to life with calcified tissue in my organs, but actually healed, whole. "The facility?" I asked. "Mercy Hills?" "Completely sterilized. The incendiary charges reduced everything to a crater. The contamination is contained. You completed the mission, Agent Kennedy, and you made it out alive." She left me then, to shower off the regenerative fluid and get dressed in the clean clothes someone had left on a bench. As I stood under the hot water, washing away the last traces of amber gel, I examined my body carefully. No gray skin, no cracks, no bulges. Just scars from a dozen other missions, faded and familiar. The blight had tried to transform me into something else, had turned my body into a garden of infection. But the regeneration tank had given me back what I'd lost. I was Leon Kennedy again. Not a walking containment breach, not a monument to desperate survival. Just a man who'd faced something terrible and lived to tell about it.